still remember the first time I saw Ethan. It was raining, the kind of slow, melodic drizzle that makes the whole city smell like hope and asphalt. I was 21, holding my coffee close like a lifeline, watching the world rush by through the fogged-up glass of the cafe window. He walked in shaking the rain from his hair, water sliding down his jacket, and smiled at the barista with that careless confidence people are born with, not taught, and then his eyes found mine. There wasn't some movie-style lightning strike. It was quieter, like the world had leaned in to listen. He mouthed, "Cold day, huh?" through the glass, and I laughed before I even realized it. He came inside, sat one table over, and asked if he could borrow my napkin to wipe his glasses. That napkin turned into a conversation, and that conversation turned into an hour, then 2. By the time I looked at the clock, my coffee was ice cold, and I didn't care. Ethan had this way of making ordinary moments feel cinematic. He talked about dreams, not the kind you tell to impress people, but the kind you whisper to yourself in the dark. He wanted to open his own design firm one day. He said he wanted to create things that made people feel something. I told him I wanted to write, to tell stories that made people less lonely. That was our first connection, feeling. We both wanted to make people feel. For weeks afterward, our lives overlapped in little coincidences. He'd show up at the same cafe. We'd bump into each other on my route to class. Once I was sitting on a park bench reading, and he jogged past, music in his ears, and stopped like fate had tapped him on the shoulder. He texted me that night. "Do you believe in timing, Ava?" I stared at that message for 10 minutes before replying. "Only if it's ours." From there, everything moved like gravity. We became inseparable. He was attentive, the kind of man who noticed when my hands were cold and slipped, his jacket over my shoulders. He listened when I talked, remembered small things. My favorite candle scent, how I hated silence while studying, the way I always overwatered plants but kept buying them anyway. When we kissed for the first time, the city lights were flickering off the glass skyscrapers, and I remember thinking, this is what safety feels like. Ethan met my friends, my parents, my whole world. Everyone loved him. He was charming without trying, helpful, funny, ambitious. I felt proud to stand next to him. I'd never been anyone's first choice before, but with him I felt chosen. He said all the right things. "You're my calm in the chaos. You make me want to be better." I've never met someone who just gets me, and I believed every word. We had late-night takeout picnics on the living room floor, planning our future in between bites of cheap noodles. He'd point at me with his chopsticks and say, "Someday, this'll be our story, the broke couple who built an empire." I didn't care about the empire. I just wanted the US. When he got his first freelance project, we celebrated with wine and too loud music in my tiny apartment. He danced with me in the kitchen, spinning me around until we were dizzy and laughing. At one point he stopped, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and said softly, "You know, I think I'm going to love you forever." I didn't say anything back. I just smiled, because deep down I believed it. Looking back now, I see the first cracks forming, quiet, almost invisible. He'd make jokes about how clingy I could be when I texted twice. He'd go silent for a day, then reappear with a sweet apology and a grand gesture. Flowers, a song, a handwritten note. He'd tell me I was too sensitive when I tried to explain how that silence made me anxious. At the time, I brushed it off. Everyone has their flaws. Relationships are work. I told myself those things because I wanted the story, our story, to stay perfect. But love, I've learned, can be the most beautiful illusion. It's like sunlight on water, dazzling from a distance, dangerous when you dive too deep. When he asked me to move in with him, I said yes, without hesitation. The apartment was small but bright, full of promise. We painted the walls ourselves, got paint on our clothes, laughed until we couldn't breathe. We made a home out of leftovers and hand-me-downs. Those first few weeks were heaven. We'd wake up tangled together, make coffee, talk about our dreams. I'd write while he worked on his designs. On weekends, we'd explore the city, the old bookstores, the rooftop cafes, the quiet alleys full of street art and laughter. I used to think I'd finally won at life, but sometimes love doesn't fall apart suddenly. Sometimes it erodes. Ethan started staying late at work, long hours, missed dinners. He said he was stressed, that he needed space. I believed him. I told myself that giving him room to breathe was an act of love. But what I didn't realize was that love without honesty isn't space, it's distance. And distance turns warm hearts cold. That's where it began. The slow fade between us and him. The warmth was still there, but it flickered, dimmer each day. And I kept reaching for it, hoping it would come back, because when you've built your whole world around someone, it's hard to imagine that world ever crumbling. But every fairy tale has a chapter the storyteller doesn't warn you about, the one where love turns into something else, something colder, sharper, and harder to recognize. Trust doesn't vanish in one blow. It seeps away, like water slipping through cracks you didn't even know were there. After Ethan and I moved in together, our lives became a pattern. Work, home, exhaustion, repeat. But love, I thought, was about surviving the ordinary. So when he came home late or forgot our plans, I forgave him easily. Too easily. He'd smile, pull me close, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "You know I'm doing this for us, right?" And that was all it took. The anger dissolved, because I wanted to believe him. When you love someone, you build excuses faster than they build lies. Ethan started talking about the future more. Shared bank accounts, buying a car, maybe even starting a small business together. It sounded exciting, like the next chapter of our story. I trusted him with everything. My passwords, my finances, my dreams. When I got a bonus at work, I told him to hold on to it, since he was better with money. He smiled, that same smile from our first cafe meeting, and said, "I'll take care of us, Ava. You just focus on your writing." Those words made me feel safe, protected. But safety, I learned later, can be the softest disguise for control. It began with the little things. He'd correct the way I spoke during conversations with his friends. He'd say I was too emotional during disagreements, that I needed to be more logical. Once, when I told him I didn't like the way his coworker, Emily, flirted with him, he laughed and said, "You're overthinking again. You know I only see you." Then he didn't answer my messages for a whole weekend. When I confronted him, voice trembling, he sighed like a parent dealing with a child and said, "You need to trust me more, Ava. This insecurity is going to ruin us." And I believed him, again. I started apologizing even when I wasn't wrong. I stopped questioning. Because every time I did, it ended with me in tears and him walking away. That's how manipulation works. Not through force, but through exhaustion. The Ethan I fell in love with still showed up sometimes. The one who surprised me with flowers, who held me when I couldn't sleep, who whispered about the life we'd have one day. Those glimpses kept me hooked. They made the bad days feel like temporary storms, not red flags. I told myself that all couples go through rough patches, that it was my job to hold on, to fix things, to love harder. He'd make promises, and break them so gently I barely noticed. He packed a bag and left that night. I sat in our apartment surrounded by the echoes of everything we'd built. The painted walls, the shared books, the plans taped to the fridge. All of it suddenly meaningless. I kept replaying his words. "You were suffocating me." As if my love had been the problem. As if my trust had been a burden. And for weeks after, I believed that. I believed I wasn't enough. That if I had been smarter, calmer, less emotional, he would have stayed. That's the cruelest part of manipulation. It teaches you to hate yourself for someone else's sins. But pain, if you sit with it long enough, turns into clarity. One morning, weeks later, I woke up and realized I didn't want to cry anymore. I didn't want to chase someone who didn't see my worth. I didn't want to live in the ruins of a love I didn't break. That was the morning I decided to rebuild. Not for him, for me. And that's how trust ended. Not with an explosion, but with quiet acceptance. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destroying someone else's life. It's reclaiming your own. They say healing isn't linear. They're right. Some mornings I woke up feeling weightless, proud of how far I'd come. Other days I missed him so much it hurt to breathe. That's the cruel irony. You can hate the person who hurt you, and still long for the version of them who didn't. But Ethan's ghost followed me everywhere, in the scent of his cologne that lingered on my coat, in the playlist he made for our road trips, in the silence that filled every room he used to laugh in. I thought I could outrun it, but grief is patient. It waits. One rainy afternoon, I saw him again, purely by accident. I was at a cafe downtown, the same one where we'd met years ago. He walked in, umbrella dripping, looking just as effortlessly charming as the day I fell for him. But this time I noticed something new, emptiness. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His laugh sounded forced. He spotted me, froze for a second, then approached my table like nothing had ever happened. "Ava," he said softly, "you look good." My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I just looked at him, the man who once held my entire world in his hands, and felt nothing but calm distance. "Hi, Ethan," I said. "You look the same." He smiled awkwardly, sat down without asking. He told me he'd broken up with Emily, that she wasn't who he thought she was. How ironic. Then he said the words manipulators always do when they lose control. "I've changed, Ava. I realize what I lost. We can start over, clean slate." And for a moment, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood the cycle. I used to think manipulation was about anger, control, dominance. But no, it's about need. People like Ethan need to feel irreplaceable. They twist love into dependency and call it care. But this time I didn't fall for it. I leaned forward and said calmly, "You didn't lose me, Ethan, you threw me away. And now that you're empty, you want me back to fill the silence." He blinked, stunned. He wasn't used to my voice being steady. "That's not true," he muttered. "You're being dramatic." I smiled. "No, I'm being honest. There's a difference." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the old Ava, the one who apologized for everything. The one who'd cry and beg and forgive. But she was gone. That night I realized revenge doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, measured. I didn't need to ruin him. He was already doing that himself. One failed relationship. One lonely night at a time. So I focused on me. Therapy, journaling, going out with friends again. I even started freelance writing, the dream I'd buried under his shadow. And life slowly, beautifully began to bloom again. A few months later, I got a call. It was from Ethan's number, but a woman's voice answered. "Hi, are you Ava? This is Mia. I'm Ethan's girlfriend." My stomach twisted, not from jealousy, but recognition. She sounded like I used to. Uncertain, apologetic, exhausted. She told me Ethan had mentioned me a few times, always painting me as crazy and obsessive. But when she found my old messages saved on his laptop, she realized I was none of those things. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I just needed to know if he ever made you feel like everything was your fault." I wanted to tell her everything. The lies, the manipulation, the loneliness. But I also knew that no amount of warning could save her if she wasn't ready to walk away. So I said softly, "Yes, but you don't have to stay long enough for it to break you." And I hung up, because that was her journey now, just as mine had been. A year later, I published an essay titled "The Anatomy of a Lie." It wasn't about Ethan directly, but about what it means to love someone who uses your kindness against you. It went viral overnight. Women from around the world wrote to me, strangers who had lived the same pain, the same confusion, the same heartbreak. And that's when it hit me. My story wasn't just mine. It was ours. The collective ache of people who loved too hard, forgave too much, and finally chose themselves. One evening, while checking my messages, I saw a name I hadn't seen in a long time. "Ethan, read your article," he wrote. "You made me look like a monster." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "If the shoe fits." He didn't reply. Sometimes I still think about the girl I used to be, sitting on that bathroom floor, crying over someone who couldn't love her right. I wish I could hug her, tell her that one day she'll turn her pain into power, that she'll write stories that heal others, that she'll never settle for half love again. Because that's the real revenge. Not his regret. Not his loneliness. But my peace.